Hey everybody and welcome to Retro Magic. In this episode we're talking about the best console of all time, the Sega Master System. Enjoy! Alright, maybe I exaggerated just a little bit, but the Master System is a very interesting console and it's definitely worth owning one, even nowadays. Although its library of games isn't too big, which certainly has to do with Nintendo's third-party policies back in the day, which said, well, if you want to develop and release games for the NES console, they have to be exclusive and you cannot release for any other platform. But that doesn't mean that the Master System doesn't have some real nice games, but as I said, we'll come to that later on. First, let's have a look at the hardware itself, shall we? Alright, here we are. This is the Master System version 2, as you can see. I used to have a Master System Model 1, but I sold it, unfortunately, a few years ago. But I'll put up a picture up there so you can have a look and compare what Sega changed for this redesign. They obviously smoothed the edges quite a little bit and made the whole thing a bit smaller. This particular model has a few scratches here and there, but overall it's in quite good condition. It's okay for me and it works perfectly well. They yeah, they installed this very noisy and interesting lid that should protect the cartridge slot from collecting dust. They also removed the reset button as well as the power indication lights, so there is no indication whatsoever if the console is turned on or not. You have to have a closer look, unless you probably leave on your console just like me for a day or two without even noticing it. One of the biggest differences is that they also removed the card connector, which was there on the Master System version 1 as well as the Sega base converter later on for the Mega Drive. It was backwards compatible to the SG-1000, the predecessor of the Master System, which was only released in a few countries. Of course in Japan, but also I believe in France and Italy. It never really caught my interest just because the games were on the same graphical level as the Atari 2600, which is just a little bit below what I consider enjoyable because I came to video games the 8-bit era. There was only one game I was really interested in, and that was Bomb Jack, because I played that on my Commodore 64 back in the day, and it's very addictive and great. So they removed that card connector, and they also removed the AV out, which is an absolute bummer because I'm gonna show you. I modded this particular model because you have your power jack, by the way, here. It's the same one that is used in the Mega Drive version 1 as well as the Sega Game Gear. And usually here would be the RF out, the only output of a video signal on this model, and I totally couldn't live with an RF picture because it's plain horrible. So I did this little mod. It's not too hard. All you have to have is a soldering iron as well as a few wires and of course a connector. Sega used a standard 8-pin DIN connector, a U-shaped one. There are two flavors. One is a C-shape connector, but Sega used the U-shape version. Yeah, you need that, and then you can install that. But if you don't have a soldering iron, if you never did anything like that, just get a Model 1 Master System, because it makes your life much easier, and all I have to do is get an RGB cable. Yeah, so let's have a look at the controller. And no, I haven't forgot about this, but I'll come to that in a minute. This is the controller for the Master System. And as you can see, Sega got themselves inspired by the Nintendo NES, obviously. I cannot really blame Sega for that, because back in the day nobody really had an idea of how a controller should look like for a video game console. Well, yeah, this one is a little damaged up here, but it works perfectly well. It's just the insulation. Basically, this is the version 3 of the controller. The first two revisions had a little hole in the center of the D-pad, which was meant for, yeah, you could mount a little thumbstick or arcade stick there. As you can see, Sega originally comes from the arcades, but I removed that on the third revision of the controller. It only has this little bit weird shaped D-pad, the square shaped D-pad, as well as two action buttons. The action buttons are really great. I like them. They have a little treble, but it feels really nice to push those buttons. They're great. The shape of the D-pad isn't the actual problem, I gotta say, but you have to push quite hard into any direction. This is what makes this a little bit uncomfortable for me to play with this controller. They also removed, or they didn't copy the select and start button over to this controller. So this button, as labeled here, also works as a start button. Yeah, that's something that limits the Master System games quite a bit, because all they really had, the developers, were those two buttons, which is the reason why some of the game developers decided to use this button as well. This is the pause button of the Master System, and I think it's the only console I know of which uses a pause button. And for most games, this does what the name says, it pauses the game. But for some titles, I think Wonder Boy is one of them, the pause button actually works as some sort of menu button. So yes, you have to have your console sitting right next to you, yeah, to use it. But that was nothing uncommon back in the day. And also the reason why usually the cords of the controllers were quite short, but the AV cords for the television were really, really long, because back in the day people thought that you would have your console sitting right next to you. I will put up a link to a site called SMS Power, and there is a thread that deals with all the compatibility issues that you might encounter when using Master System. So there is a list of games which are using the pause button alongside the action buttons. And there is also a list for those few games which refuse to work with a Genesis or Mega Drive controller that you could usually use because Sega decided to use the same controller ports on the Genesis that they used back on the Master System. So yes, you can, in 99% of all cases, use a Mega Drive controller on your Master System, but there are a few games, really about 10 maximum, that will not work with this. I believe one of the few big titles would be Wonder Boy and Monster World. Well, as for region lockout or region compatibility, there isn't much to say. There are a few games which are a little picky. Once again, have a look at that site. They're really great in collecting all the information that's needed. As a bottom line, usually only the Japanese games will not work on a PAL or American console, and vice versa. So, yeah. With that being said, let's have a look at the games. And here we are back, and we're talking about games. And this is how the games for the Master System look like. Not very beautiful, in my opinion. I have no idea what went into Sega when they designed those covers, because, I mean, look at this. The white background with those stripes, it's just, probably they thought it would catch people's attention. But Well, it did, but not in a good kind of way, because I remember back in the day when I was a child and my parents took me to a game store, well, actually a toy store back then. They had this whole wall with the NES games, and they were all so bright and colorful and interesting. And they had the Master System games on a small shelf on the side. You couldn't even see the front cover of the games, so it was looking like this. And I looked at that and thinking to myself, what is this? Is this educational software or something like that? And then the very next second, I was back at the NES games. No, definitely a very bad idea by Sega. But I have to give it to them that they used plastic boxes from the beginning on, which is a very, very good thing for collectors nowadays. As we all know, Nintendo used card boxes, which simply, yeah, they break over time and get lost. But those plastic boxes are very sturdy that Sega used, and oftentimes they even come with manual when you're shopping for the games nowadays. So for collectors, this is really great, and all those games that I do own are in very good condition, actually. And they're not too expensive. You can get many Master System games for complete with box for like $10 nowadays, and the console itself for around $20. There are a few exceptions, of course. I believe Psycho Fox is one of the more expensive games, and of course Phantasy Star, which is probably the most expensive game for the Master System. But besides those few titles, generally it's a very inexpensive console. Alright, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and depending on when my capturing card arrives, I will be able to put up a video with Master System games recommendations in the future. If you like the video, like and subscribe. It will help me to put up more videos, and if you think I forgot something to mention in this video, leave a commentary in the section below. See you next time. Bye.